Good evening. I'd like to welcome all of you to Communication Day, the first evening event. I also want to remind you that we are doing a live streaming of this particular event, so I think it's going to be something that we'll be able to share. Would also like to thank everyone who came tonight. I think this is a testament to how much we believe in the power of strategic communication. So in doing so, what I'd like to thank, of course, is Dean Rice, who was able to put this all together, and also welcome the wonderful fellows who have been here in Boston, who are committed to going out and making the world a better place. Welcome to Emerson College, the first communication department in the United States. With that in mind, all I will say, because the provost is going to give you more, is it's wonderful to know that you've had someone go out and change the world. And it's also, I think, as we look at the professors here, it's wonderful to know that the type of nurturing environment that we actually offer our students is actually met by someone who says, I'm going to pick up that challenge and I'm going to be a change agent. So all I would say to Alyse is, welcome home, back where you belong. We hope to see you visit us often. With that, I'd like to introduce the provost of Emerson College, Michelle Whalen.
Thank you, Greg. So good evening. I'm the provost at Emerson College, and on behalf of our president, Lee Pelton, who unfortunately was not able to be here tonight, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this really auspicious event entitled Women Using Their Power to Empower. Collaborating with Vital Voices Global Partnership, Emerson College is delighted to welcome such a distinguished moderator and panelist. We know that history is influenced by those writing it, and too often women were not seen as change agents, as engaged leaders and catalysts for their communities by predominantly male and often white writers. Nonetheless, feminist scholarship has continuously uncovered women who have played pivotal roles in academic fields and professions, those who may not have been given credit, but who have shaped the world. In the 21st century, we have moved beyond the imaginability of women leaders to the endowment, empowerment, and enactment of those women on a global scale. As Bell Hooks states, quote, sometimes people try to destroy you precisely because they recognize your power. Not because they don't see it, but because they see it and they don't want it to exist. Vital Voices is both supporting women leaders and accelerating women's leadership, and thereby driving change socially, economically, and politically. Who better to moderate this panel than Alyse Nelson, President and CEO of Vital Voices Global Partnership. A co-founder of Vital Voices, Alyse has worked for the organization for more than 20 years, serving in a variety of roles as Vice President and Senior Director, and before assuming her current role in 2009 as CEO. Under her leadership, Vital Voices has expanded in reach to serve over 16,000 women leaders in 161 countries. That's really staggering. Alyse is the author of the best-selling book, Vital Voices, The Power of Women Leading Change Around the World, and has been featured extensively in international and national media. She completed her graduate degree at Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and more importantly, her undergraduate degree at Emerson College. I'm told that as a political communication student, Alyse came into class one day and stated that she would be going to the United Nations Fourth World Congress on Women in Beijing. And at that conference, more than 2 decades ago, First Lady Hillary Clinton, no, I'm putting it in a historical context. That was the famous quote from Hillary Clinton, that human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights. And so it's no wonder that Emerson faculty see that trip, combined, of course, with your coursework and your experiences as a passionate advocate, as the metaphoric launching point for her career as a change agent and as the CEO of Vital Voices. So we have a wonderful panel coming up for you. And now we're going to just play a short video about Vital Voices. So I'm going to hand this over to Annie.
It starts with a leader. She's got a vision.
I want to put women in politics. I want to develop dignity and self-respect. I want to spread that.
Economic transformation. You make that wheel turn, everything else will turn with it.
She could be an entrepreneur, a human rights advocate, or a parliamentarian. She recognizes a problem in her community and she commits to solving it.
It's all about justice. If you don't have justice, you don't have a fair life.
If we're going to create a democracy rather than just something that stops the gun, we want something which is different than what went before.
We search the world for these leaders. We see what they do. We see that they know better than anyone what needs to be done. So we partner with them to make their vision a reality.
Vital Voices became part of my family. It helped me to realize that I do not have limits.
There's someone there for you. There's a woman somewhere in the world that is ready to support you.
We offer training, mentoring, and connections.
It's giving us space. It's providing an opportunity. It's opening a door. That is Vital Voices.
Over time, we consistently see 4 things happen. She brings her vision to life.
I had promised my people that I would build a school, and I delivered.
Today, we have markets for every single one of the products that we make.
She shifts culture.
They stood up for their daughters. For me, they were the real heroes.
The kids are growing, knowing that it's wrong to beat a woman.
Now we have trainings for mothers and fathers, talking about issues that they would never have talked about.
She gains global recognition as a leader.
I'm now another woman, a powerful woman, a leader woman.
And she reinvests in her community and beyond.
When you take a step forward, you turn around and pull somebody else into that space, and then they pull somebody else.
And this is what I'm trying to do, is telling other women, you are leaders.
It's not about how much I improve my life, it's how much we improve as a group.
This is the power of Vital Voices. We find extraordinary women leaders and we do everything we can to maximize their impact, to extend their reach and to make the world a better place. Not just for women, for everyone.
Vital Voices give us the exposure, the tools, the platform, but it is our fight.
Well, thank you, Michela, for that incredibly kind introduction. It's wonderful to be back at Emerson. And truly, it is absolutely the truth that it was such a launch pad for me, having gone to Beijing while I was a student and having great support. And Dr. Payne, where is Dr. Payne? Back there, just an incredible mentor and role model. So thank you for that. I strongly believe that we encounter amazing people throughout our lives who will shepherd us and mentor us to the people and the leaders that we're going to be. And I think, you can never really pay them back, but you can pay them forward. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so thrilled to be here and to introduce you to an extraordinary group of women on the panel, but even more so, an amazing group of 22 women leaders from 17 countries around the world who are all influencing the political lives and trajectories of their countries. So I just want to ask all of our fellows who are here for the VV Engage program to just stand so we know you're here. And also Manira Alva, who leads this work that we do on political leadership, and Annie Osborne. Annie, somewhere. There she is, of course, making sure it all runs smoothly. So I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to talk a little bit more about women's leadership. Over the last 23 years, 22 years that Vital Voices has been in business, we have supported 16,000 women across so many countries around the world, across different cultures and generations and religions and borders. But there is this distinct model or way in which we see women leading change. What we see more often than not, and we've seen it and seen it and seen it, is that women experience something that touches them. Could be good, could be inspiring, could be challenging. And that propels them, motivates them to step up to right that wrong, often, in their community. And what we tend to find, I think, more often than not, is that they are seeking power to empower. That is the trajectory by which they get into those positions of leadership. They want to make that change. I'm not saying that men don't do that. I'm so thrilled we have so many men here today. But I think that as we see more and more women coming into leadership positions, they are changing the way we think about leadership and, quite frankly, the way we think about power. And that's what we're going to talk about, because we've got some powerful women leaders here bringing so many different perspectives from around the world. So let me just quickly introduce them as we go down the line here. First, the former Prime Minister of Peru, first female Minister of Peru, Beatriz Merino. She was a congresswoman, a senator before that, incredible career, also worked in the private sector. But one of the things I just found out, like 45 minutes ago, is that she was also in Beijing at that conference. And I love she had to convince the opposition party to take her as part of the delegation. You were as well. Wow. Next, Dame Jenny Shipley. She was, as well, the first woman prime minister in New Zealand. Both of these women, as you're going to hear, started a trend. And as well as being the trailblazer in being the first prime minister in her country, she also served as in many other senior ministerial posts in the New Zealand government throughout the 90s, including health, social welfare, women's affairs, transportation, state services. I have to look at this to read to make sure I don't forget all of the leadership positions she held. Next to her is Laura Liswood. Yay! Laura is, well, first off, her first title is she's one of my greatest mentors. I met her when I was 20-something, and I had just rocked up in Washington, D.C., armed with my Emerson charisma. And, she helped guide that charisma into substance. and I, to this day, we were just actually with your president, your incredible president here at the university. We were just sitting, and I said to Laura, I oh, I just love sitting and listening to you talk. So thank you. She's the, now I have to give you her real titles. She's the Secretary General of the Council of Women World Leaders. This woman traveled the world, the first person to ever do it, to interview every single woman sitting and former head of state. So elected head of state, 75 in total. She's written a book, but she started a council, which we'll hear about, which was like the only peer network these women had ever had up to that point, right? Because many of them, there was no example. So next to her is one of our fellows, a phenomenal woman leader coming to us from Uganda. Dr. Agnes Atim is chair of the Local Government Finance Commission in Uganda. But when we first met her a number of years ago, because she's been part of the Vital Voices Network about 5 years now, she actually was a social entrepreneur and really had this great expertise for decentralization and women in agriculture. And she actually runs and supports a network of 10,000 women in agriculture throughout northern Uganda who, yes, and she's connecting them to markets, right? It's great to have a business, but if you can be connected to real, business and markets, that's extremely important. Tracy Bame is our next panelist. Tracy is the head of the Freeport-McMoRan Foundation, and she is also the head of all social responsibility for all of the Americas at the company. And this program would not happen without the incredible support and advocacy of Tracy and of the company that she leads their foundation.
And, you know, we're going to get to this on the panel, but can I tell you something? It's extremely rare for companies to be investing in women's political leadership. And so the bold step that they have made to say this is important and it affects the economies of countries, and to make that link, it's so vitally important, and I know many more companies will follow in her footsteps. And finally, of course, Emerson's own Dr. Mary Ann Taylor. She is assistant professor of rhetoric in the Department of Communications, and her research is grounded in feminist rhetorical theory. She focuses on how gender is constructed and mediated in politics and sports. So thank you so much for being part of this discussion. We're going to have a little bit of a dialogue, but really then open it up to all of you. So please get your questions, your burning questions, comments ready, because we really want this to be a good discussion, and we're so thrilled to have such a wonderful group. So I want to start out with James Shipley. Oh, Jenny, oh. I feel like we're friends now. So I want to ask you, I mean, you, in the last 20 years, you've had 3, yourself and 2 other prime ministers who are women, currently 1 now, who is, I mean, amazing, and gave birth to a baby while being a prime minister, breaking so many barriers, and of course, I want to talk about what's going on now there. But how has it changed, or how has it maybe normalized the idea that we can't get our heads around here in the United States of a woman leader of this country, you know, of a country, right? And how has having 3, they always say sort of there's that, you know, that important, yes, you know, 30% or 3 in the group, you know, leads to some changes in thinking?
We're a small country, and part of the willingness, I think, to be open to women leadership was centered in the renaissance and emancipation of Maori. We won't go there tonight because it's a whole story in itself. But I think if you realize that your future is recognizing inclusion and diversity delivers multiple benefits. There had been a lot of discussion, initially denial and then engagement and then progress. As a woman leader, when I was in office, we had been doing a lot of reform. New Zealand's story is also a story where we had to grow up quickly. No one was looking after us after UK went into the EU, and leadership was required. So I was part of a generation of men and women who realised we needed to take a stand, both in what we sought to do and to bring our multiple leadership styles to get there. I'm not going to pretend it was easy, because it wasn't. You know, being first anywhere, you are literally breaking through. And I'm so thrilled that there are fellows here, because I hope their generation won't have to feel so individually exposed as perhaps those who are first. But being first means that others suddenly get more used to the fact that women and men work together, and we do bring different styles. Helen Clark, who followed me, Helen and I are quite different, and yet we now offer 2 role models. And then subsequently, after 2 male leaders, Jacinda Ardern, our current Prime Minister, has taken the leadership role. And if you analyse our styles, we are uniquely different in both our origin. All of us women, I have babies. They were older when I was Prime Minister. Helen and Peter chose not to have children. Jacinda had a baby while she was Prime Minister. But why that's important is that our daughters today and our sons, my little mokapunu, my grandchildren, have role models. And once you get the critical mass and they are diverse, then it becomes less exceptional. People are not always looking at, you know, your hairstyle or your clothes. They get past the gender into the message. And so I think while it's a novelty and it's demanding, and it's still demanding for our outstanding Prime Minister right now, once you are present and engaged, you can bring different things. So New Zealand's experience is, it was a battle. It's still at least demanding, but it's less demanding because New Zealanders have got used to the fact that women and men together are making a huge impact. And I don't think a political party in New Zealand is electable unless they can demonstrate diversity. So we've got past that point. They simply wouldn't be able to put a list up if you didn't have women and men. 31% of the parliament in New Zealand is now female, and we have enormous diversity over and above that. And we do not have quotas. So the acceptance in New Zealand that diversity delivers a dividend is well embedded, and women have led, truly, women have led the dialogue and broadened the engagement in order for that conversation and reality to be there.
Well, you know, I think over the last week, we have all been watching what has unfolded after the terrible terrorist attack in New Zealand. And I think one of the things that's been so interesting is to see the commentary on the way in which your Prime Minister has handled it and what she's done. And it is, in my mind, I think it's a very female approach to dealing with terror, and people have talked about that and how she's changed the game and shown this new model. And I'd love for you to talk about how she's done that and how people are seeing that in New Zealand and what it means to them.
Well, I want to acknowledge the people who have lost their lives. We should never accept that people at prayer should be taken. And excuse me, New Zealanders are genuinely heartbroken that this has happened there. But Jacinda, Prime Minister Ardern, is she's an exceptional young woman. She's 37, and if you watch what she's doing right now, she's doing one or two things that I think a mature female lens in an important context just shows something exceptional. So she's been incredibly decisive in calling out that we will not be forced from hope to fear as a people. And she just put language around that immediately and stared down this unspeakable criminal. And she won't give him the privilege of calling him by his name or by choice. She has said to the public, I will not call this person by name, because to do so allows him to control us. And she is doing all that she can to see that the language around this is kept focused on the victims, not on the terrorist themselves. In other words, it's a shift of power. And through her presence and her leadership style, she is succeeding both at home, even in this terribly traumatic environment. Both the families around the victim are nurtured in a hopeful setting insofar as they are now saying publicly, we still want to call New Zealand home. And I attribute part of that to the Prime Minister's ability to step forward. I don't know if you've seen the photo of her, but I don't think anyone needed to say to her that a shawl bridged a gap when she went to meet those people. But don't misunderstand her leadership style. She immediately on day one said the gun laws are going to change. And everyone who's dared to open their mouth, she simply said, don't argue with me, these gun laws are going to change. She's leading a coalition government, and she didn't give them space to argue with her. And sometimes as leaders and women leaders, it is simply, I've decided. And, you know, she's got collateral at the moment where you'd be brave to stand up to her, but she'll carry those arguments. I think the ability to see in a moment that how to be a decisive leader, but how to be empathetic and wrap yourselves around people just broadens that leadership space. And while she does not represent the party that I served, I can tell you that to a person, in both the former and current leaders, she has our support as she is taking on this huge responsibility. And I think she will change the game in some ways. That there's one other thing I need to say. Her generation, being her age, she can with authority address the context of this event because it was the first fully manipulated manifestation of someone who used social media to try and advance the terrifying controlling act. So this person by choice was wired, and the minute he began his intentions, he was reaching out. And she is saying, you know, she will not allow him a voice. He will get a fair trial, But he'll have to speak to himself if our Prime Minister has her way. She is looking at how she can limit his ability to re-inflict the agony. And it is a generational challenge that my generation, if I preached about controlling social media, it would be hopeless. I think she has the intellectual capacity and the moral authority to at least invite us to argue the line which is emerging in New Zealand. Where does free speech end and social responsibility begin? Now, this is a high wire act, and we're not there yet, but welcome to our world in New Zealand, because we will not allow a free, inclusive nation to be manipulated by a person who wants to use the fact that we perhaps were naively open to then broadcast to the world his hate, when we will not give in to that. New Zealand is not a hateful nation, and our Prime Minister, I think, is daring to give voice to the fact that we don't have to automatically accept that social media platforms don't have to choose. At the moment, Facebook is being called on to come and account for itself. Now, I can't remember a leader who has actually called out platforms where they couldn't control stopping live streaming that was showing people taking their lives. No platform has the right to do that. And so the Prime Minister is leading on multiple fronts in the most emotionally stressful of circumstances. Don't let me hear anyone say that women can't lead in demanding circumstances where both compassion and decisiveness is required. I would like to say that, our generation of leaders did some of it, and Helen then did more of it, but Jacinda and her generation, I think, are taking all that we have learnt and shared, and she's making it her own.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah. And I should mention that Laura, Councilwoman World Leaders, these two extraordinary former prime ministers are here this week because they are serving as mentors, role models, advisors. I'm sure they're learning a lot as well, to our incredible fellows, political leaders from around the world. So thank you so much. And Prime Minister Merino, I wonder, thank you. I wonder if, just building upon that, after you were Prime Minister, after your tenure, there were 3 other women who came along and were President or Prime Minister of Peru. And, it's surprising to me because I think of Latin America often as, the machismo. Not that it doesn't exist here, we all know. But, how did you break through? What was it like to be the first woman president in Peru? Or, I'm sorry, I keep saying that, Prime Minister in Peru.
Perhaps what happened is that through the past years, I had been like the first woman several times. Like I was the first Peruvian woman to ever graduate from the Harvard Law School. Like I was the first woman, and like I was the first woman to run the Peruvian IRS, and then the first woman to run the Peruvian Customs, and then the first woman ombudsman, and so on. So it came to me, I think, more as a consequence when I joined politics. It took me, I was thinking about it this afternoon, it took me 15 years since I decided to walk out of my comfort zone. And I had developed a very good career in an international corporation. And I tend to say always, should I have stayed, I would today be very rich and play golf. I don't play golf, so I don't even know why I say that. And then I went through all these jobs, and I was elected to Congress and to the Senate and so on and so forth. And I guess I took my life, public life, very seriously, like most of my life, And I worked very hard, and it's just like, how do you get to the Carnegie Hall? Practice, my dear. And I just kept working and working, and it was like there were eyes looking at me that I wasn't aware of at the time. And then the time came when my country was falling apart and so on and so forth. The president at the time had a 7% approval rate, and maybe women are called when like men are dying or something, because it was like 7% approval rate. I mean, how worse can it get, And And so I walked into it, and I knew that they were going to call. I had a sense I was going to be called, like, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 hours before it happened. And I said to myself, you know, okay, in almost 200 years of this republic, no woman has ever been offered this job, and I'm not going to be the woman that says no if they call me. So, so when they called me, I took it like every other, you know, challenge that I had taken. So, and I walked in, and what happened then, to my surprise, was that I could see the pain in the men's eyes. You know, it was, I think, more difficult for them than it was for me. Because at the end of the day, I was doing my thing. I was, you know, working and trying to do the best and taking it very seriously and leading and so on. And I could see, for example, the members of the cabinet, how much in pain they were. I had to sit down with one of them one day and say, have you ever had a woman as a boss? And he said, no. Have you ever had a woman as a peer? No. And I said, well, how do you feel with me? And I said, it's very difficult, Beatriz, very difficult. And he really liked me, and we had a good relationship, but you know, I tried to think what was going on in his mind, you know, when he had to accept the authority and the leadership of a woman, when he had never had to do that in his life, and he was, I don't know, 60 or something. But it was even worse when the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all the military and all the armed forces had to be called in and do this to a woman. You know, they were in shock, and I could see that. So I decided to take it. Yeah, they were really in shock. And when they had to sit with me and talk to me about, you know, whatever, you know, military and all the intelligence and all that, they were like, why are we having to do this? And you know, so I decided that anything that would work would be good for me. So I looked at them and I said, okay, this is a macho culture. You're so well, not only in Peru, all over Latin America, right? So I said, okay, what's going to work here? Whatever works, I'm going to do. And because I was the first, no other woman had done it before. So I said, I started listening to the comments of people, you know, about my presence, of how they looked at me. The country was like, a woman. And I said, okay, I think they need a mother. So I started being like very motherly with everybody, you know. But I tend to be very, you know, affectionate, and so that wasn't too difficult for me. And then the other thing I was telling Alyse earlier today is, I said, I need to have. I mean, with a 7% approval rate of a president, you really need time. And so you need time to work and to turn that around, and it did turn around, I have to tell you. He finished his mandate, and it did turn around. I don't know what he did with the rest of his mandate. I don't want to talk about him anywhere. But the thing is, it was just so funny because I said to my friends, okay, I said, I usually wear very little earrings, like these pearls are the only thing that are big that I wear. And I would say, okay, to my girlfriends, I said, bring all your earrings to my house. So every day I wore an earring and I changed an earring, but I did that on purpose. So everybody's, oh wow, did you see her earrings? And I said, yeah, talk about the earrings while I work. I mean, you know. So I used it the other way around, you know. Yeah, good, talk about the earrings. And then we go, what, 2 more points and 3 more points, and we can work, and we can do the taxes, and we can do the this, and we can do that.
Now, did you do, like, the snake earrings? I mean, the way that Madeleine Albright with her pins would, like, send the messages?
I would wear any ring. I would never wear them again because they were even mine. But all I'm trying to say is I don't think that I was intimidated by the job. I think that I thought it was a very important job at a very difficult time of my country, and I thought my country deserved it. I thought if I had decided to leave my comfort zone in the private sector and had decided to come in. When I started in politics, 2/3 of Peru were under the flag of Shining Path, one of the worst terrorist groups in the history of the world. probably similar to Pol Pot or something. Yeah. When I decided to leave my comfort zone, the economy in Peru had almost disappeared. I mean, so it was almost a failed state, okay? And I belong to the generation that defeated that. And I belong to the generation that made it possible that young Peruvians like you today have a country where they can live in and has a stable economy. And I feel very happy. And it was, I'm not going to tell you it was easy. It was not. We will probably talk about, you know, the media and all that, and all the pains and all the suffering and so on. But if I had to do it again, I would do it again, because I feel very happy that the young people today, and then 3 more women were made prime ministers. After I was made, the scale and the percentage at Parliament jumped several times in the Parliament. And today, in Peru, we have a cabinet that is 50-50.
Amazing. Laura, I want to come to you, because you are most definitely the world's, you know, leading expert on women's leadership at the top job. What conditions do you see need to be present for a country to have multiple heads of state versus countries like this one that have never had a woman head of a state?
Right. I think we'd be happy for, let's get past the first rather than the multiple.
Yeah.
We'll have that first. And you know, when you think about this country and what have been some of the barriers and challenges for women to take on the presidential role, you know, we're a country, as every country is, basically a country of myths. You know, who are our archetype heroes? You know, what does the media show that leadership looks like? And if you look at the media myths, I mean, we have this basic myth of the hero's journey, which is basically this young man has to overcome great odds and slay the dragon and defeat the evil empire and find the Holy Grail, you know. And then when he's victorious, he gets the keys to the kingdom, he gets a pot of gold, and he gets the hand of the fair maiden, you know. And that's the hero's journey, you know. The other counter myth is actually a terrible myth for leadership, and it's called the rescue or rescue me myth. Classic Cinderella, you know, who's been talking to the mice, you know, and or Sleeping Beauty. I mean, this is a woman who's been laying on a table for about 100 years, you know, never ages, which I kind of am looking for now, you know, and you know, is non-consensually kissed by the prince. Non-consensually, we have to note that. You know, that's the rescue myth. You know, and these are myths that are underlying, kind of all how we think about, you know, who people are entitled to be. Now we're breaking through some of that, obviously, but it's also a challenge in the United States because now this is slightly changing, but I'm not sure how much yet. We have historically gotten our presidents from the vice presidents, you know, which we have had, of course, no woman yet be a vice president. It may come from the commander, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. You know, until a few years ago, women were even allowed in combat, so they couldn't be chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So if you start pulling away some of the pools that we fish from, other roles we get them from governors. Very few women governors. You know, I think one of the women that everyone was looking to was Jennifer Grantham. You know, great woman governor, born in Canada. You know, so you know, you start getting these kinds of challenges, you know, and you know, I was kind of hopeful this last time we'd get, you know, another female self-indulgent billionaire to run for the office of the presidency, you know, because it's not so easy, and as both the prime ministers have shown, not so easy if you're the only woman running. You know, this is the critical mass notion. And that's why it's kind of interesting that what's going on right now.
It is interesting.
With so many women, you know, because you do start to dissipate this issue of what's her hair, well, slightly, what's her hair, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that we have to understand that that's a bedrock of the United States. Other countries don't have those kinds of myths, so they have different myths. And you know, when you look at the Nordic countries, they seemingly, I call them the Nordic nirvanas. They got something in the water that you know that has a lot of women. They have a bedrock base of equality in their countries. I think that helps that along. I was telling this story. Iceland, for example, Iceland's had prime ministers, had presidents, women, and you don't think about this, but Iceland is a fishing culture, was a fishing culture. And men went off to sea for 11 months of the year. You know. So the women had to do everything, naturally. You know, they had to do the house, they had to do finance, they had to do parliament, they had to do everything. And the men came for a month and then left again. You know. So again, we have to look at all of these underlying causes for why we're still struggling, for example, in the United States. Other cultures, they have different kinds of institutional structures that aid and abet, you know. But if you look at leadership, and that's your model of Vital Voices leadership, if you look at leadership, you know, Gary Wills has a really interesting quote. He says, "Show me your leaders, and you bear your soul." You know. So what do our leaders look like? Because they will be a reflection of us. Mm-hmm. You know. But if you look at what leadership requires, it's not gendered. You know. It requires ideas. It requires the ability to communicate. It requires passion. It requires the ability to help others get to their goals. You know, I mean, Howard Gardner has this context of leadership, which says the first trait of great leaders is that they have a true north. Well, both men and women have a true north, a sense of values. You know. The second, he says, is that you're willing to challenge authority. You know, well, both men and women can challenge authority. The women's very existence is the challenge of authority. You know, the very presence of a woman is challenging the power structure. You know. Third, he says that you just literally have, that's why I like Emerson College, literally have the ability to communicate your ideas. Yeah. Incidentally, number one fear of Americans is public speaking. Yeah. Number two is snakes, whatever. But practicing your ability to convey, because you can have ideas, these prime ministers can have ideas, but you've seen how eloquent they are. They know how to convey their ideas. And the fourth one, and this is one I think that women really have a hand up on, if you will, is he said that great leaders have traveled. And he didn't mean traveled to Kenya, as interesting as that would be. What he meant was traveled outside of your worldview. That's right. Mm. Right? Now, we can define that perhaps as the empathy, you know, which Prime Minister Ardern is completely exhibiting at the moment. And I think women, you know, and it's not that I don't think men make great leaders, they do, you know. But women have distinctly, because they have historically been out of power, have had to develop that ability to travel, to understand what the dominant group is doing, you know, as a member of the non-dominant group. So when I think about, you know, leadership, I'm heartened by what I'm seeing now in terms of the broadening of all of the skill sets. I mean, our challenges are way too complex to leave aside the skill sets of a large group of people. You know, we need that, and that's why we need the generational kinds of things. So, you know, and you know, this notion of change, and change goes from the unthinkable to the impossible to the inevitable. Yeah. But we have to just get past that unthinkable part. You know, and that's what I'm looking forward to leaders, you know, particularly the younger leaders, saying, why? Why is that unthinkable?
Yeah, it's true.
You know? And then
I would say this generation, I think can't get past the unthinkable. It seems, yeah.
And then it will be inevitable. So, thank you.
Thank you. You know, I was, you know, always great gems of wisdom. I was thinking about, I was recently at this gathering called the CEO Initiative. It's something that the Fortune magazine puts on, and they invite the top, mostly male, but the top CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And as a number of men were going around, this was the CEO of Delta, stood up and was talking about how the number one skill he relies on as a leader, and I'm like, yes, empathy. And I was like, wow. And I have to say, I mean, I don't know that empathy would even be in this, you know, field if you didn't have women showing the power of empathy, you know, and bringing that. Marianne, I want to bring you into the conversation. And first off, let me just say, if you were here when I was a student, I'm probably older than you, but anyway, if you were here when I was a student, I would have just hung out in your office all day long and like sat at your feet and learned all of the wisdom. Anyway, so it's, first off, I'll say it's wonderful that you're here, because it's such an important perspective in all communications. And I just wonder, as you're hearing this conversation and all of what Emerson is doing with polling and in the political space, and seeing what's happened in this last year, to have a candidate who I think really enabled us to see, wow, there's a lot of sexism, and a lot of people don't think women can be a leader. And this is regardless of politics. I'm really not getting into politics. But I think also then just to see what happened next, and to see, I mean, I certainly see it, I'm sure you see it, you know, that women's issues is in the mainstream. I mean, if you go into your local, you know, gift shop and they've got a whole women's empowerment section, you know something has changed in the universe, which is great. And I hope it stays. I hope it's not just flash. But I'd love to know from your perspective, what are you seeing?
Thank you. Wow, it's a lot. First, you're welcome anytime. And I love, and I think this is a really nice jumping off point from structural limitations. And as you were talking, I was thinking, yes, yes, yes. And to that, I would add voter disenfranchisement, which of course we know Eric Holder, Stacey Abrams, and among many other are taking on about who can actually get into a ballot box and cast votes. I think to a structural limitation to, you know, just add voting barriers, and one that I focus a lot on with my students, and where I want to leave us with a little bit of optimism, because this question of why not the United States yet? You know, Shirley Chisholm, Geraldine Ferraro, Hillary Clinton, and Sarah Palin, of course, in 2008, and now we're seeing this field of at least 5 and maybe more women as we move forward. You know, when we look at this, you know, why not, and what is that last obstacle that's stopping us? And for me, it's a really optimistic notion, because I think one of the major limitations lies with us. And it's the way that we have been conditioned and constructed to use language to talk about candidates in certain ways that place obstacles on the candidates. And I'll use a couple of examples of just everyday easy changes we can make in our own language to stop using terms like she's not likable, to use terms like she's not electable. And I talked a little earlier today about when you think of someone like Beto O'Rourke announcing his candidate, see, we're not thinking about him as he's not electable, as he lost to the most unlikable guy in the country, to Ted Cruz in Texas. And so when you think about likability, there's something that's gendered there. And I think a really, a thing that I would caution, a thing in attention I would caution us to, and something that we can think about, is in our everyday, how we use these patterns to talk about politics. And I think there's no better ground right now than something like campaign finance reform and individual contribution. I know from folks in my class and from folks that come to my office hours and talk, there's a real wanting for candidates that don't take PAC contributions, and we're looking at language like unique contributions, which I think is interesting, individual contributions, PAC contributions, and it's a really wonderful thought. And then I have to ask and caution, in United States politics, where we know individual contributions to date for women who are running for office do not approach what men receive in individual contributions, and typically running those campaigns are coming from unique contributions and PAC contributions. And I would say, although some of those problematic, they're not all created equal. There's nuance, there's complexity, and I think when we start talking about tensions like that, we have to be careful about when we say, I'll only vote for a candidate that accepts X. That's immediately exclusive of half the field, and what does half the field look like who you're excluding? And I think just asking that simple question of, is there something bigger here? Is there more nuance here? I'm very interested to see how Elizabeth Warren will continue running her campaign now that she's announced individual contributions only. When I saw that, I got a little white. I lost a little color. I took a deep breath, because I'm thinking, boy, rhetorically, that's a really strong move, and in practice, that's going to be really, really difficult to do in the United States and compete against the field you're competing against in the Democratic primary. And I can't wait to see how it plays out to, I think, give us a pathway and a new vocabulary for maybe how we can talk about even funding women candidates. So I do think there are some big structural limitations that give us, why not, and give us a frustration. But I also think it's really optimistic in that we can say there are little things we can do in our everyday lives that contribute to the progression of women sort of getting into those representational offices that I think, to your point, is so important, that we see these leaders so that we have a vocabulary for where executive offices are not gendered towards masculine.
Tracy, from your perspective, coming at this from a corporate perspective and working in an industry that's heavily dominated by men, why from your perspective is it important to support women's leadership in public life and in government and in politics to positively impact economies?
That's a really good question, and just for a bit of context, because Freeport-McMoRan's not a household name, not everyone knows what the company is or does, but we are a global, primarily copper mining company. We operate in 6 different countries around the world, a big portfolio in the Americas, and really, at our core, we're about shared value in the communities where we operate, in the countries where we operate. We're mining a resource that exists there, and we believe it's our responsibility to make sure that those communities and the countries as a whole prosper from our activity. And so we're very deliberate about looking at the kinds of social responsibility and community development activities that we're investing in. And as we started to explore, maybe about 10 years ago, were the investments that we were making actually having an impact on our communities, and what were some of the barriers to additional capacity and ability to become sustainable over time? And were communities becoming more or less stable, more or less economically viable or successful? And we really started to attend and pay attention to the dialogue that was happening around the power of investing in women. And really sort of a light bulb went off that when we looked across our portfolio of programs and what we were doing around the world and trying to empower and enable economic prosperity in our communities and stability, which is obviously critical to any business's ability to operate successfully, is that we weren't providing equal opportunities for women. We couldn't even look at our programs and say that the education and training or the capacity building efforts or any number of things, didn't necessarily have a pathway for women. There were women participating in them and taking advantage of them, but we realized we were missing a huge opportunity to contribute to that economic acceleration and to that stability of the places where we operate. And if you think for a minute, mines exist usually in places that in the world that can be very, very unstable and, very challenging environments. And we just recognized there was a huge unmet opportunity or unmet need to invest in women, get more women into leadership opportunities, and we, quite frankly, we believed the research. We believed, and we could see it when we started doing these types of things, developing programs that were specific to the needs of women, the power that they were starting to have. So we kind of started in the women's economic empowerment space, and then we started to think about this notion of women's leadership, and if there were more women in governance, in politics, in public policy, how much more success would these efforts and the countries where we were operating have if there were more women in this leadership space. And we just happened to be smart enough to get connected with partners who were doing some amazing work in these spaces and really start to educate ourselves about the kinds of efforts that were successful in helping women become more powerful leaders in their communities. And, you know, I think it's kind of scary for a lot of corporations. You definitely don't want to create a perception that you're trying to influence.
Yeah.
Policy or politics or governments, and that's not what this is about. And we had many, many conversations with Vital Voices about how do we make sure that this is about helping women capture and enable their own power. It doesn't matter their political views, it doesn't matter which side of the ideology they're on. This is about women being able to take their place at a leadership table, for their voices to be able to impact policies that affect women across their countries. And that in and of itself would create stability and economic opportunity. But we sort of quickly got over that fear, and I hope that, you know, other corporations will follow suit, because I think it's incredibly important.
Thank you. One of the women leaders that was in the film, Inez McCormick, who I know Laura knows well, fabulous woman from Northern Ireland who worked on the peace accords and has since passed away. But one of the things that she said to me in the very early days of Vital Voices is we were starting up, and it was a hard slog. It always is hard, you know, to work on these issues and stay focused. And she said, you know, there is a benefit to historically being left out. We think differently. We tend to be more innovative, more creative. We think and act in bold ways. And, you know, I think about the story, Agnes, that you were entertaining us all with over lunch. Really talk about, you know, historically being left out and then all of a sudden at the table, and boy, changing the table. So just to give you a little background on what I'm talking about, Agnes, as I mentioned, is an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, works, you know, deeply integrated into rural communities in Uganda, had built this phenomenal network of women farmers that she was supporting. And then comes an opportunity to serve the president by really being the person to advise on the national budget. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, she came to discover something very interesting. And I would love for you to tell that story about what you discovered, and also about this particular program and why it has been valuable. You know, one of the things that we have seen, and that research that we've done bears to be true, is that when women are part of not just having mentors, but when they're part of peer networks, and they can connect with people who are, you know, in a non-hierarchical, non-competitive, and very diverse networks, that's valuable in taking risks. So I'd love for you to talk about this recent risk that you took.
Thank you very much. I feel a bit intimidated that I'm talking last after very phenomenal women.
Best for last.
and I think I really draw a lot of power and inspiration from all that they've said. I think I begin from the point of being empowered and being capable to know that I've got to do something with the space that I've got. And I think my experience stems from Florence, I think 2-3 months ago, when we were all joined together as a group in November. And it was all about strategy, about communication. And then there was this word that came around having, you know, focusing.
A driving force.
But also, you know, having a driving force. And I remember in the room, we were all being asked, what is your driving force? And when I went there, I actually had no idea that I had a driving force. And so from there, I figured out as I went back home, I said, what is it that I want to do with this space and with this knowledge and the power that I feel really inside me? So I went back to my office. As Alyse said, I chair a commission, finance commission in my country, that mainly advises the president and government generally around allocating resources to local governments and local governments is where the services actually happen. That's where service delivery happen to the ordinary people in the country. And I felt that was a huge responsibility. And in this meeting at Vital Voices was around how do you actually leverage the space that you have to create that desired change. And what is that change? What is that driving force? So I saw an opportunity, and I thought for me to reach that rural woman that I've been really working for and doing so much for the last 20 years of my career, I have got to do something with this money. And as she said, I've been in the development sector, in the private sector, really figuring out how to economically empower women so that they can take charge of their own lives and their own families. And so I saw an opportunity. And I was in this office for the last 1 year, and I was figuring out what am I going to do here. And I was the first woman to be the chair of the commission. All my predecessors were really retired civil servants who were really coming to spend their retirement. They would hardly come to office. My secretary, called the permanent secretary, is about 68 years old. And so when I came to office all the time, I was very active. And the old man came and said, "But what are you coming to do here? Most of your predecessors would hardly come to office." I said, "But I've been appointed to work." And so it is from that question that actually intrigued me more to understand what is this thing that they do not want me to do. And on one of the things, the main tool that I've been looking at is how do I put money in the hands of women so that they can create the desired change they want in their community. And here was being responsible to analyze the budget and advise the president. Then I said, I've got it. And so I took off time, really looked at the budget, analyzed it, and I got two things. I realized that this national budget that is always read every year had two gaps, very big gaps, that I wondered whether they had not seen it, whether it was deliberate, or it was me who was actually wrong, and it was really a big risk talking about money. And so I found in that budget the money that goes to local governments that we call conditional grants, 85% of it goes for wage and what we call non-current wage, which is mainly operational money. And so the only money that remains with the local governments to provide the desired services is actually only 15%. I said, I've got it. And then the second thing that I saw was that the budgeting system was so centralized, and yet we have very good policies, decentralization, development plans, and participatory planning. If you read our policies as a country, it's the best. Because during my research, I did quite a lot of reading of our rural development policies. I did a lot of research around rural development policy. But I was always asking questions, but why are we not developing? So the whole idea around budgeting and planning was so centralized that as local governments, they would wait and be told that this is the money you have, plan for it. And the planning is actually within the little budget. So I picked the courage and asked for and seek for an appointment. And everybody laughed at me and said, who do you think you are? Even your former chairpersons never met the president. Then I said, but why did he appoint me to advise him if he doesn't want me to meet him? And everybody thought I was crazy. But somehow I figured out a way to meet and to present my case. And I had only 5 minutes to do that. And actually, I think that's where, again, maybe being a woman is a bit of an advantage as well. Because if you want to get something, you really figure out how you want to get it and how you really get that. So in the 5 minutes, I was able to ask 2 questions to my president. I said, are you aware that we are actually running a more of expenditure government other than really a productive government? I said, what do you mean? I said, if our local government was a business, we would close it. I said, why? I said, you can't run a business with 85% expense and only 5% capital. And so there is actually no business. Then he said, but what do you mean? I said, at the moment, the budget that we have does not speak to the people. The people do not feel government because there is no money which is reaching to our local people. And then the other thing I said that, are you aware that most of the investments, the money that government is putting on, the communities are actually looking at some of the infrastructures? I said, but why? I said, I think because the planning is being done by somebody else, assuming that that is what the community wants. And so if you go across the country, you find a lot of, for example, mills and all that for processing not being used, just because they actually don't know why they were put there and how they should use it. So somehow it made sense. And he said, so what do we do? I said, I have a plan. Just give me some time. I'll go and think about it and come back. And in that 5 minutes, I had the whole local government leaders in the whole country. And it looks like I made a lot of sense to them, although the president maybe did not really understand where I was coming from. And I saw all these men, I think only 2 women are really district chairpersons in the country. I saw them really clapping and standing up. I'm like, what did I say? So I went back with that challenge, again with the driving force, because my driving force is how do I use my position to get money to reach, or services to reach that last woman in the village who does not have a voice. But here I am sitting here with all this responsibility and I've got to do something. So that driving, it kept on really pushing me hard. So I came back, took off 2 weeks, and remember, I've never worked in the public sector and I have no idea how government things actually work. And so the whole team did not understand me, the whole commission, but I did it. I just put up together a concept note proposing to government to fund a region on issues of local economic development, building industries, developing the infrastructure, and developing the tourism sector, and also, like mindset change, human capacity development for the civil servants to start thinking about running government as a business, not really as a public sector where whether you work or not, the money comes. And everybody thought, what's wrong with this woman? How can a government be run as a business? But I basically wanted to really bring something that would finally reach the final person. And so I developed my concept, went back to the president, presented it, and wow, it was really taken by surprise. And he liked it. And he said, okay, go and develop for me a cabinet, what they call a cabinet memo, so that it is then accepted or approved, legally by the cabinet. And when I came back, working on a cabinet memo, again, all the civil servants, my commission, the ministry, everybody was looking at me. And they thought I was really crazy. And I had no idea how the system actually works. So me, I was just doing my stuff. And after that, the program was finally presented to cabinet, chaired by the president. It was approved, a project of $200 million for the next 3 years in that particular region. And I saw the cabinet approving that government needs to find money. Ministry of Finance basically needs to find money, something which has never happened. Usually after that, they would be running around looking for a loan or something. Then I came back and said, where did they find the money? And why is it that, it was not being thought about? So basically, this comes to me that this program that we are in is actually not in vain. When we come together, you come with an open mind. You have no idea what you're really going to expect. But there is this one thing that normally strikes you, and all of us here have that feeling. I saw it in the morning when we were telling our stories, that there is this one thing that strikes you, and you go back and you really want to do it. And it is, whether it is a risky thing or it's easy, but there is a way that you develop that power to go back and do something that will empower other women that you've left behind.
Beautiful, beautiful story. So if anyone ever questions and says, well, I don't understand what getting more women, into political positions has to do with the growth of the economy, well, I'll just point them to you. You can tell them exactly what you've done. Wow. We're looking forward to seeing the impact of that. I want to go out for questions now. There's so much incredible wisdom, knowledge, experience up here, and I would love to see if anyone, our fellows included, have any questions, comments. I don't know if we have a microphone. Okay. Do we have a microphone? I don't need one. Okay. Very good. Well, this is being live streamed, though, so I feel like it would be good. Why don't you come on up here? Sorry.
Just repeat the question.
All right, I could repeat the question. But I want you to introduce yourself and your name and all that. Yes, exactly. Okay.
Hi. My name's Annie. I'm a political communications student here at Emerson. So a theme of this evening has been, like the different generations of women that we have here in this room. And a struggle that a lot of women in my generation face is imposter syndrome. Do you guys all know what that is? Yeah. Is this something that any of you all have struggled with? And how do you feel that women of different generations can help each other with this struggle?
Oh, great question. Okay. Who would like to take that? Okay.
I think every woman who's been in a position of power is exposed to this question. That you find yourself there and you think, am I good enough? Do I know enough? Am I entitled to be here? Is my voice legitimate? And we've been socialized as women to be in support, not in the lead. And in my opinion, the imposter syndrome is partly that notion of often nobody's given you the license. You've had that moment where you decide you're going to lead, but it still pushes back. So I want to say to you, any of you who are here, it is real, but it's a voice that you need to deal with. And if you have a purpose, as a number of my colleagues have articulated to you, keep going back to both your leadership intent and your leadership purpose, and when these other voices come in, and they are there and they're real, and acknowledge it and put it in its place, and then keep going.
I'll also say it's really important to have other women around you that you can ask, is this happening to you, kind of thing. When I did go around meeting these women leaders, I kept hearing such similar stories from them about some of the challenges they faced. And finally, it got a little funny because I'd say, oh, Prime Minister, don't worry, Prime Minister so-and-so had the exact same problem. And they seem to be so greatly relieved about that. Because I think because women have this kind of social pressures, that when something does happen to you, that triggers that imposter syndrome. If you don't have others to say, is that happening to you? Then you begin to think there's something wrong with me, rather than, oh, that's just a dynamic that's going on in society. So one of the things that I always recommend is that you create a group for yourself of like-minded people, both men and women, but women particularly, who you can say, I'm experiencing this. Did you experience this? So you can push it away from yourself and understand the dynamics that are going on.
I just very briefly, I totally agree. I just wanted to mention that when I had to run these huge agencies, one thing I noticed immediately was every time I wanted to promote a man, he would say, thank you so much. And then when I wanted to promote a woman, she would say, oh no, I don't think I'm ready. So I would say, sorry, you're promoted. Just, that's it, promoted. So, but, and always when I arrived, it was just like one woman or two women, and then when I left, I made it, very clear. It was going to be like almost 50-50, if not 50-50. But I totally agree with my two colleagues. You're not alone. And should anybody have a doubt here, you can get my email through Vital Voices. Just write me an email. I'll answer to you, and I'll say, you're not alone. Just go and get it. You're gonna make it, because I am very sure you're gonna make. Come on, who would have said to me when I was your age that I was ever gonna be a prime minister? I was the first professional generation in my family. I was not the daughter of anybody, the sister of anybody. I mean, of course I was. But all I'm trying to say, like, they were not politicians or famous or anything, and it happened. Because, at the end of the day, I went and got it. So if ever you have a doubt, men and women, just send me an email, and I'll write to you.
There was a great study that I read a couple years ago, and it was talking about how a number of people said, why are there not more women commentators on news shows, or women writing op-ed pieces? Like, why are we not hearing women's opinions? And then they began to dig into that and look at it, and they realized that what would happen is they'd find a woman expert. No problem finding a woman expert on X topic. Reach out to her and say, will you write about this? Will you come on our show? And then they began to realize, women would say, well, let me think about this. Hang up the phone and talk themselves out of it. And I'm sorry to say, and this is actually a great thing. I have in my head, what would a man do in this situation? Man get the ask and say, I'll do it. Hang up the phone and say, okay, now how am I going to do it? And I often try to channel men when you're asked to do something. You're like, I don't know how the hell I'm going to do it. Just say yes, hang up the phone, and then figure it out. Really, I mean, I think there's much we can learn from each other. What other questions do we have? Okay, let's come on over
and
here.
Alyse, quickly, if I can add, if you want to run for office, which I highly recommend, so many of you in this audience do, Women Count, Emily's List, local emerging leader organizations in Boston, and also Miss Magazine has writers and columns for young aspiring people running for office to write to. So I'd recommend those resources as well.
Right, great. Let's see, let's go over here. Oh, we have a...
Hi. Hi, my name is Ava. I'm a freshman and a political communications major. I've noticed that particularly in the political and leadership sectors, women are often expected to do more work for little to no compensation. And a lot of times we are either not offered the same benefits as men or offered less benefits. And I was wondering if any of you had any advice as to how to combat this problem.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I think from a personal experience, the position that I hold in government is highly placed, but I realize it's actually the least paid. And it was least paid mainly because of who we are, and I think the least work that we were doing. But I faced it really face-to-face just a few months ago when I actually went to Ministry of Public Service and started demanding, why is it that my commission is the least paid compared to the others? And the whole minister in my face told me, but you're a woman. Why would we want so much money? If you were a man, it would be understandable. And I thought, okay, this is a real issue here. And I came back and started mobilizing and thought, okay, since I'm a woman, I don't deserve to be paid as the rest of the people. So I went to actually the men in other commissions who are slightly higher, but not, of course, at the same level, to push that agenda. But and after that, when it was actually about now to happen, then I was called upon again that, but doctor, you are the one who brought this idea. So I think the issue is so much about our ability as women ourselves to demand what we deserve, But also the other issue is that to assess our net worth and ask for it. Because most times we feel very comfortable with what we have. And we seem to downplay our net worth. And so you sit there and you're comfortable and doing that and you don't care. And so we live in a very competitive world. And so I've learned how to knock, how to ask, irrespective of whether you're going to take me as a woman or not. And so I think the best way is, first of all, to identify your net worth, go for it and ask. And then also, there is always this idea around, like, for example, when after the program was actually approved, and then, of course, all the men came from everywhere, because I'm one of those one of those very few chairpersons of the commissions in the country, and say, no, you don't have the capacity. Your commission is, so little, you don't have the capacity to manage the program. And I asked them, I said, so I had the capacity to develop the concept, but because now it involves the money and so much power and all that, then I don't have the capacity. So it is real. There is a lot of inequality in the way women are viewed when it comes to the monetary terms, payment, remuneration, but also the ability to manage some elements of financing and all that. Yeah.
Can I just add? I think that one of the things you can do to get the conversation centred is to ask what is the scope of the role. So if people are asking you in, and then say, what are my peers who are filling this role paid? So you create an expectation that you can do the role and you expect to be dealt with seriously. And we have to give you the strength to have that voice, because unless you cross the line, we'll keep repeating the same mistake. I do think the net worth, valuing yourself. Women are often grateful when they come back into the workforce after having their babies, that just getting on the ladder as opposed to asking that question and believing that you've got the capability. So it's both sides, but feel empowered and ask the question.
One other quick add is that as individuals, we all have a voice to hold our public institutions and our private sector accountable for things like equal pay practices. So I would say, the more we ask the question, the more, transparent those kinds of processes and practices become. Certainly our external focus on empowering women helped raise this question and this conversation internally. And that's not my area of responsibility, but we used what we were doing externally to influence how we were looking at women's advancement, equal pay practices, recruiting women into our workforce. We used that as a transition to have those important conversations and make sure that we were implementing that we had fair pay practices and fair promotion practices and development programs, career development programs that were equal. So I think, we all have that ability to demand that accountability.
But this is not a campaign, it's got to be an action-orientated thing. I'm sick of campaigns.
Yes.
My runway's getting shorter, and I've campaigned for 40 years, and I've suddenly worked it out that when you're the chairman of a company and you ask whether there's pay parity and they say you're working toward it, you say, where's the latest study? And they say, we haven't done one. Demand the study, so you've got the facts. Then get a plan as to how you're going to correct it. And they say, we'll do it over 5 years, and say, explain to me why this person doing the same job as that person should wait 5 years. Where is the priority here? So we have to, as women, when we get into these positions of influence, to use our power to enable change. And I think there's a difference. Your generation must demand that this is not simply activism and lobbying that justifies the status quo. We know a lot about this stuff now, but it's still a matter of leadership to get the transformation.
And let's just say, if you never ask for it, the answer is always no. Yeah. If you ask for it, the answer could be no. But you also have an equal probability the answer could be yes. Yeah.
I see another hand. Yes, Rama. Coming this way.
I'm sorry.
And Annie, how much more time do we have? This would be the last question? Okay.
Hi, I'm a short woman, so I need to stand up to be counted. My name is Rehema Kasule from Uganda, a proud Vital Voices Network member, currently at Harvard University doing a fellowship for advanced leaders. And so don't ask how old I am when you hear advanced. My question is, it's really a comment. We all know that when women lead, positive change happens. As a group, how can we amplify voices and multiply faces of young women in political leadership? That's number one. Secondly, I've worked with various women around the world in terms of politics. And interestingly, it's the women politicians who are pulling other emerging women down. What can we do to change that? Thank you.
We have to, let me be very honest and share a story. When Jacinda found herself forming a government as Prime Minister, she also disclosed to the nation that she was pregnant. And you can imagine what happened. Everyone, the whole cliche of can women do this stuff? The media went ballistic, and as I mentioned earlier, Jacinda was not on the same party that I came from, and of course the media rang and said, what do you think? Because I'd had babies when my children were grown up, and there was a nanosecond where I thought politically, but my heart told me I had to speak. And it was interesting that a number of us, not just me, but a number of us said, of course she can be a mother and be a leader. In fact, it will make her a better leader. So you are right that sometimes we hold women back with our own voice, sometimes unwittingly, but we have to make a commitment to be the air beneath the wings of women leaders if we are serious about the change that is required. I've sat at enough tables now where I know that if there are a diverse range of views and gender is present. Actually, in New Zealand, it's not only gender, it's Indigenous as well. The quality of decision-making and the quality of the outcomes materially changes. So I always put inclusion first before diversity now, and it's only through experience that I've understood that to be willing to include and then go and seek the diverse foresight and mindset and worldview, do you really get into this rich space of allocating resources fairly, making decisions in a more balanced way? And we're only learning as we go. It isn't that long that we've had groups of women leaders and multiple women leaders. And so we shouldn't be alarmed, we just need to be committed in order for us to keep going. But I want to encourage you to reflect on the concept of inclusion and then diversity, as opposed to just using these words as cliches. They are action-orientated concepts that as outstanding leaders, each of us, each of you, if you're in this room, I'm assuming you are leading, and you have to own this stuff. You can't say it's someone else's job. It's everyone's job to make the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I want to say something very, very briefly. Two examples. I was invited to a dinner party 2 months ago or 3, I think, and I was seated next to a woman secretary of the environment, and I didn't know her, so I was, very protocol. How do you do? Da da da. And then she cut me straight and said to me, "Oh, before we continue talking, I just wanted you to know that the reason I'm sitting here is because of you." And I said, "What?" I said, "Well, when I saw you become Prime Minister 16 years ago, I knew I could do anything that we really wanted to do in life. So those were what Prime Minister says, the air under her wings without even me knowing her or anything. The second thing I want you to know is about 15 days ago, because I thought I was as young as most of you, I was exercising and I messed up my knee, okay? And the doctor said, "You want to go?" And I said, "I need to go." And they said, "Okay, so you just sit here and don't move," and I have a wheelchair, and because the truth of all this exercise is that we are successful leaders if you go and get it. If you become prime ministers, if you become the leaders of the world that you are going to live in and that you are going to change. We had our chance. We did it, we lived it, and we're very happy that we did it. But we will be real successful if all of you, most of you, go and get it and do it for the future and for the generation.
No better last words. Thank you all so very much for being part of this. Thank you to Emerson. I so enjoyed the conversation. Thank you to our incredible panelists, to our wonderful fellows, and thank you. Good night.